just recording this now, so I've placed it onto record.
That's great.
Okay.
Okay, that's great. Ray, if Dan, we suddenly lose Dan with Wi-Fi. Could you Dan Thomas, do you want to explain the ground rules before we start?
Okay, yep. So if everybody should be muted. If you could keep your microphones muted throughout, please, unless you're asked to contribute. If any questions, any comments could be placed into the chat function, and that will then be summarised by Ray, and any questions answered either as we go along or towards the end. Okay, off you go, Simon.
Yeah, today we are just discussing distance learning, so we're not answering general questions about coronavirus. We had a few queries yesterday, which we can pick up on with individual people, and we'll mention those in the chat. But if we could just keep the questions around this distance learning concept, because that's what today's show is about. Okay, we'll start off. Welcome, everybody. My name is Simon Kidwell. I'm the head teacher at Hertford Manor Primary School in Northwich in Cheshire, and this CoronaCast webinar concept happened last Friday when we got the new guidance around how we respond to coronavirus and how we shut our schools safely and opened safely as childcare centres on Monday. So me and Dan's the assistant branch secretary for the NHT, and myself as the branch secretary, we were getting literally hundreds of phone calls and we couldn't respond to the volume of phone calls that we got. So we set this up so that we actually could respond to it, and it was very much a Q&A type thing at first, but then it suddenly morphed over the weekend into, we started hearing about some really good practice. We brought people like Simon Smith into the conversation. Ray joined us. Ray's our other co-host today. Ray, can you give everybody a wave so we can see you? Okay, we brought Ray in. So it's actually established a shape and a pattern and a rhythm where we meet every day and we discuss issues. This is the first one where we're actually becoming quite proactive and not reactive, because most things we've been talking about is reacting to the changes in legislation. And I'm delighted today that we've got two exceptional educators with us. We've got Professor Becky Allen. Becky, could you unmute your mic and say hello?
Hello.
So it works. Hi, Becky. And if
Hi.
you unmute again, I'll just say hello to Alison as well. And we've also got Dame Alison Peacock, the CEO of the Chartered College for Teaching. Alison, would you mind saying hello to everybody?
Hello.
If you unmute Alison. There we go. Alison, if you press start video on the bottom left, we'll be able to see you as well. There we are.
Okay. Hello.
Good morning, Alison. Thank you for joining us. So I'll bring you in to the chat as we go on. Okay, so I just wanted to go through quickly the core learning from this week and why we do these daily briefings. So the three things really are working around three core principles, and those core principles we've developed across Cheshire West, but it's now spread across many schools in the country. Those core principles are that we are no longer schools. We now provide childcare, and that's been very difficult for someone to get a head around, but we're only providing childcare. The second core principle is that we developed in Cheshire West is that every school looks after their own. We are hearing about hub models developing in other parts of the country, and some schools suggesting hub models for Easter. However, as a group, we feel that concept is going to increase cross-contamination. It's going to increase risk. We heard from Richard Strachan yesterday, who was the chair of the Warrington Halton Safeguarding Board, an ex-policeman. We don't think that's a resilient model, having a hub where all the children come together, where they may have chances of cross-infection. So we very much, in our community, we're looking at one school looking after its own. And that doesn't matter if you have one child. Because very much we want to make sure the spread doesn't happen. And the third one is that we have minimum numbers of children and minimum numbers of staff accessing the childcare. We want to make sure that people who are accessing it really are corona critical workers. We've had an interesting debate about a banker who's working from home who wanted to access the childcare in one of our schools. And we're saying, no, your children can actually be looked after safely at home. And we also want to make sure that our vulnerable children are looked after, but that doesn't mean they are in every day. There's other things we can do. And Simon Smith mentioned about what he's doing in Whitby around looking after his vulnerable children, where they're coming in for a couple of days a week. So very much looking at that making sure you use the concept of last resort. They're the conversations we've been having with parents. Only use this as a last resort, because we know that this disease, we know it knows no boundaries. It doesn't respect class, doesn't respect anything. We know that it's a pernicious disease, which is actually ripping through our communities. And we need to make sure that we lock it down by locking down the number of children and locking down the number of staff that are and congregating in school. Kind of a summary of where we are, but I want to devote today's web and learning I think has been at home doing some home working as well. Morning, Becky.
Morning. So thank you very much. I feel a bit nervous talking to all of you about educating primary age children, because I don't know as much about it as you do. But I also think that and many of the things that we hold dear in terms of the structures of primary education, I think we end up kind of having to chuck in the bin to create something that can work. And that's the thing I'm quickly discovering. So my two children are in year 1 and year 4. I'm probably going to say some things here that I would rather were not made public. So I don't want to go onto Twitter and find you saying Becky Allen said her kids are really lazy and things like that. But
Becky,
because
just stop
we're
you a second. Sean, are you on the call as well? Sean Griffiths from the Sunday Times. If you unmute and say hello, Sean, if you manage to log in.
I can't see her online, Simon.
Everyone else is back, and we've also already completed 2 weeks of homeschooling. And obviously we've got loads and loads of things going for us. You know, I know something about learning. We care a great deal about education, and we're quite invested in making sure something happens for our kids during this time. And because we've known this is coming for quite a long time, we've been able to do some planning. But we have got 2 major challenges, and I think they're the challenges that reflect a lot of white collar workers. Just massive lack of time. So just as in your jobs, you've had a huge amount of like disruption and upheaval in effectively your businesses, your schools, and stress. Almost every single business in the country is going through unbelievable kind of disruption, including disruption, frankly, to their sources of income. And so for me and my husband, you know, our number one duty every day is to ensure that our businesses are secure, that we're able to pay the wages of our employees, so that we don't end up putting other families into really, really risky positions. And that takes up a lot of time every day. We're also having to look after a household. You know, we don't have any support. We can't have anyone in to help us do that. And it leaves just this tiny amount of time that's available to do some homeschooling. But then we've got this other challenge, which is that our kids are really normal. And by that, I mean, it's a massive battle to get them just to do their homework on Sunday evening. And getting some kind of motivation to get stuff done for the kids is really, really tricky. So I want to like describe to you like 3 things that we appear to be able to do that work. And reflect on what they're like in relation to the things that don't work and some of the things that are being set by schools and why I think they don't work. So my number one thing is something that I cooked up with someone called Marie-Claire Brethren, who's the education director of a MAT up in Lincolnshire, who I saw just before we went into isolation. And we call this like the efficient pursuit of fluency in the 3 R's. And what we cooked up, and she actually created this for me, is this grid. And on the grid, we've got the days of the week: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And this is for my daughter. So she's got 10 tasks that she has to do every day. My son, who's in year 1, has only got 7. And the tasks are either things, they're all things to do with the 3 R's, and some of them are apps that she can use, and some of them are either worksheets or books. Now, we were really lucky because we knew that this was coming quite a long time ago. We went onto Amazon and bought some of these things. And the reason why we're doing this is, the reason why just focusing on the 3 R's is a really brilliant thing to do. Is, well, number one, yes, it's important, of course, right? So if we think about, imagine this, like this persisted, and between now, my daughter towards the end of year 4 and going to secondary school, she couldn't go back to school. Like, getting the 3 R's right is the most important thing as far as I'm concerned that happens. But it's also great because it's just hugely amenable to having minimally supported learning taking place, because all we're doing is just revisiting endlessly old stuff they've already learnt. They find it really easy to do this work in a relatively unsupported way, so that my husband and I can just get on with trying to sort out our own work for the day, you know, sorting out the house and things like that, because they're just revisiting old stuff. One of the things I'd say we've learnt gradually about this, and I see lots of teachers on Twitter saying how much they like online learning and apps because it allows them to monitor who's doing what. But from a parent's perspective, it's giving kids access to devices that are also apps that they're using for gaming, chatting to their cousins and friends online and so on. And so I personally am finding like the use of apps quite a challenge. And I'm thinking next week of just actually switching away from it and just having bits of paper and things that are completely disconnected from iPads and so on, which is something I really didn't expect to say, because I love a lot of the apps. I just find the challenge of stopping them log on to other things a real nightmare. So that's like one thing that works for us. And it works from a motivational perspective, just because you know there's a really half an hour, 40 minutes or so, and that's it. And you've done loads and loads of really valuable learning. But it's obviously not particularly engaging or fun for the kids. And on the one hand, there's like a million different resources out there you can use, but it's just completely overwhelming if you're a parent. And none of us really have the headspace each day to rifle through stuff and try and pick things out to do. And we've also got this kind of, I think, we want to make time at home memorable in some kind of way. And what we see at the moment is that we see our kids who absolutely love going on their iPads and playing games, and nothing else in the real world quite measures up to it. And so the thing I was kind of mulling over is just how can we create a world within our own homes that's just more compelling than going on an iPad? And I think that's genuinely really difficult to do. But yesterday we started the thing that's been created by Tim Taylor and Deborah Kim, Explore More, called the Troll Hunter. And I guess it's like an imaginative inquiry that families can do together. And we spent an hour on it yesterday. And so we did chapter 1. And it was incredible. I mean, the kids loved it. They completely entered this kind of imaginary world where you're introduced to this queen to begin with, who's sitting in a tower and you don't know why she's there and she's really scared. And then slowly you learn that there's an issue with these trolls that are coming in and eating the sheep. And it completely captured their imaginations, and they literally cannot wait to do chapter 2 when I get off this call. So yesterday we were able to like draw pictures of castles, talk about castles and why they've got the different things they've got. We had a long chat about like the different trolls we could remember from other books we've read. We drew a map of our kingdom, we made a den and so on. And so we are definitely going to be doing that every day. And then the third thing that like works for us is our kids are inevitably going to bed a bit later than usual. So we're just trying to extend bedtime. And whereas normally, like at bedtime, they would read to us, we would read to them, usually a fiction book. I'm just trying to add in some sort of non-fiction reading at bedtime. And so, I mean, I'm probably going to return to something we've read before, which is like the Silk Roads illustrated book. And that's just a really easy way to have some kind of conversations about things. And then in terms of like what really hasn't worked for us, what hasn't worked for us, I suppose, is getting information about the national curriculum on a map and being encouraged to work on the things that they would be working on at school. For example, my year 4 child should apparently be working on the human body and the food chain, but she just can't really do this independently. And it's not on the year one curriculum. So if I'm going to be doing that with her, like, what am I going to be doing with my year one child? I also think that some of the tasks that can be set by schools, on the one hand, they look like they could be really engaging class tasks in a classroom setting, but we just can't really make them very engaging at home because they're quite detached from other things that we're doing. So, for example, you know, my daughter should be writing a letter that's linked to the Power of Reading book that they were doing, but getting her to do that without tons and tons of supervision is really, really difficult. And one of the things I think is kind of curious, particularly in the primary sector, is like, before all of this happened, before coronavirus, there were a lot of you talking all the time about the curriculum and getting the curriculum right and structure and sequencing. And for a lot of you, you were kind of trying to move away from this idea of topics towards these discrete and meaningful subjects that were properly sequenced, like history and geography and science. And none of that really reflects the reality of my school that I've got now. I've got these 2 kids in my school and they're different ages and there are different points in the national curriculum. And I really do need them for the bits where I'm interacting with them, for them to be working together with each other, because they find it motivating to work together, and because I just have really limited time and I can't do something with one child and not the other for half an hour. But also just the national curriculum doesn't necessarily like start from my interests, start from their interests. And so it's kind of ironic that in this age where we were supposed to be moving towards these discrete topics, you know, I find myself working on a topic, and our topic this week has become trolls, and it's not in the national curriculum and it's not a discrete subject, but it is fun and we're building memories. And somewhere along the way, we might even learn some history and geography and science. And I think that's okay. So for me, that's how home learning has been working out so far. And it looks very different from the kind of curriculum that I would imagine that I would have developed at home, and even the kind of curriculum that I think would work in a school.
Thank you, Becky. That's really, really helpful. And actually, I was talking to a radio show this morning about the similar things, because this isn't statutory. There's no requirement for schools to push out this content. And some of the things you're saying are really going to help us shape what we do in schools, because the content we're pushing out is to help. It's not to actually say you've got to do this, and it should be optional, in my view, in every household, because there might be different things. And I'm delighted to see that Tim Taylor and Deborah are involved as well, because they're 2 of our most creative educators around. And there's also around this concept of children motivate each other when you've got a class of 30, and it's far harder to motivate a household of 1 or 2. So don't have those expectations. The reason our children behave very well in many of our schools is because of peer pressure. So you won't always have that when you're in a small group. Okay, Ray, anything to say before we bring in Alison?
Yeah, so lots of people online finding this really refreshing. Carla's saying that perhaps it's more about disconnecting rather than connecting, and that being online is not the panacea that we think it is. So people are really enjoying what Professor Becky Allen is having to say.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to bring in Alison Peacock now from the Chartered College. Welcome, Alison. Good morning, and thank you for giving us some time this morning.
Thank you very much. So I love listening to what you were saying, Becky, because it's real and it's now, and it's real children in your home setting. And I think it's so important that we have to kind of reboot as a teaching profession. We need to now think, what are we going to do over the next few months that's really going to enable our young people to love learning, and they need to love learning in their home situation. And as a teaching community, we need to learn as much as we can about how best to do that. So one of the things that the Chartered College is doing is we're looking to international educators. We're looking to colleagues who have been engaged in remote learning for many years. I was just on a conversation with one of our fellows this morning, Andy Goff, who's talking about a friend of his who's in Australia. They started off with Skippy Radio back in the day, 20 years ago, and now they've developed an online learning system in Australia, which I think we can learn from. And essentially what they're finding works really well quite often, and this is with secondary pupils, but this idea of flipped learning, which also works quite well with sort of upper key stage 2, whereby resources, maybe a video prepared by the teacher is available for the student, but also available for the family to look at and to learn from, and then to engage in some activities around that. I've also been speaking to some early years educators this morning, and they feel what they really want to be able to do is to provide via mobile phones just some daily sort of tips or nudges or ideas for parents engaged with their children in not necessarily a middle class home, just with their children, what can they do that engages them in talking and learning together. And then the other thing that the Chartered College, which of course is why we're here as a professional body, that we're all about, is about building the professional knowledge and expertise of teachers across the whole workforce. And again, you know, we're very keen that we provide opportunities for that. So we have a page on that's freely available. You don't have to be a member of the college, which is My Chartered College, my.chartered.college, which provides a whole range of resources around home learning and supporting that, but also CPD. So there was already a wide range of CPD available for teachers. Most of us are too busy to access it most of the time. So now just maybe, although I haven't found this myself, I'm completely screen bound, but anyway, maybe there's some time that suddenly emerges in this period where we're working from home, where we can stop and engage in things like courses from FutureLearn. There are all kinds of colleagues that are providing free online CPD. So obviously, you know, we would say we would want you to read the resources on our website and we'd want you to engage with those. But, you know, people like Tom Sherrington, Catherine Morgan, Neil Armand, the Cambridge University Press, Leeds Beckett, Dylan William, you know, all these people are providing a whole raft of resources. Andy Buck has opened up his Leadership Matters resources for free. There are lots of opportunities for teachers and teams to take some time to learn. But I would honestly, listening to Becky just now, I would say the biggest priority is how we shift our relationship with our students and our families, because as primary educators, you know, a big part of what we do is all about the connections that we build and the ways in which we model an example of how we learn together. And we need to sort of recalibrate that a bit, don't we, at the moment? We need to think, this is not about offering a timetable and telling people off when they haven't done things. This has to be about how do you provide something that stimulates the imagination of the child and the parent so that it doesn't feel like a chore, so that it feels like people can celebrate learning together in a very different way. It's an opportunity, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alison, for that. That was really helpful. And the opportunities we're starting to see as well, how we support our families and how we support their mental health and their households. So when our friends at school and Chair of Governors is going to a family quiz next Friday. So using this technology we're using today where they can sign in as a family. We're also using our learning platform to check in on our children. So we expect them to at least say hello once a week using our online learning. And if we don't, we'll give them a ring. So there's all sorts of ways that we can work and develop different ways. And actually, I had a governors meeting with Dan's school yesterday. And it was the best governors meeting I've ever been to. It took an hour to get through 3 hours worth of business. So actually there's some real opportunities for us to work more efficiently and work differently over the coming weeks. Ray, is there anything you want to say before we open up to questions?
So just in amongst this, we're just hearing really a different range of perspectives. And I think that's something that we've just got to be very aware of. So we've got examples from secondary parents of secondary children saying they're feeling under a lot of pressure because the school is trying to maintain the same level of expectation. Equally, on the other end of the spectrum, colleagues within the early years are saying we need to focus on the social and emotional support. Life has been turned upside down. It's very difficult for any of us to manage normal systems. So I think in all of this, we've got to recognize that we're not going to find one solution that's going to please everybody. I think having spoken to other colleagues yesterday, there is still a little bit of fear from head teachers or schools' perspective about getting it wrong, because there seems to be all sorts of different great resources out there. So I think this is really a great opportunity to pick up on what Professor Dame Peacock has said, which is if we knew as head teachers that all of the resources could be all in one place, then that would save some of the fear of getting it wrong, which can be quite challenging. Another call out again for the resources about the troll hunter. Lots of people saying that that's a really good resource. So having some of these ideas in one place is great. I know there was a lovely article by Professor Janet Goodall this morning about home learning. So having all of this in one place with the Charter College would be great.
Thanks, Ray. That's really good. So if you could filter some questions, and before we do that, though, I'd like to bring in Simon Smith, because Simon works in the community in Whitby. So Simon, if you're on the line, could you say hello and just share your thoughts about home learning and what it looks like in your community?
Hi, yeah, cheers, Simon. I think one of the things we've got to be really careful, and I agree with Alison and Becky, is actually we've got to get a balance here. I think this is what we're doing is very different to what we do in schools, and if we try to replicate school in the home, we're actually going to make it impossible for our parents. And actually, our job has fundamentally changed, isn't it? You know, it's, yes, education is still our core, and yes, I'm passionate about education. And yes, just put it down. Thank you. And yeah, I'm passionate about children. Who needs children? God. And I'm passionate about education, but actually one of our key jobs is about supporting our parents and the mental health of our parents and our families and keeping them going, because this is going to be a long haul. And therefore, looking at curriculum, it needs to be about not the demands, but about how do we get them to engage? How do we get them to be excited? So we're very much, as a school, looking at that kind of project-based kind of approach that Becky was talking about, because actually I think in a home circumstance, that's a much more effective way of doing it. So we're currently planning for after Easter at the moment around ideas that families can do together and children can do together, because it's a very different model how you would work at home. So you know, and actually embracing opportunities, so embracing chances to cook or garden or do those things, I think are really, really important. And our role is to help parents create those kind of structures, but they're going to have to find their own rhythms and patterns. And so the key bit for us is communicating with our parents. How we communicate with our parents, have those conversations, help them develop those rhythms and patterns in their house. I would agree with Becky about the 3 R's. I think reading, writing, maths, they're key. But actually,
okay, Simon, that's really helpful. Thank you for
Cheers.
your input. It's always good to see you and hear you as well. So just before we go into Ray's questions as well, we have got lots of great content coming out. So we had Ruth Swales and Pi Corbett on the call on Saturday morning doing the webinar. And I know Ruth's working on some materials that she's posted on the chat. So have a look on the chat. And also I tuned into Pi Corbett's radio blogging this morning that he's doing. And that's a weekly radio show to help teachers and parents with some ideas about what you can do. But before we open up to questions, I just want to bring in Alison Ashley around CPD, because what we found in our school is that we want to make sure we've got a paediatric first aider on site where possible, and we want to go and train all of our staff remotely on paediatric first aid. And Alison, you're starting to think more deeply about that, aren't you, in terms of what you're providing at Headland Green Special School?
Hi.
Alison.
Just before I go on to that,
Alison,
could I mention picking up on the point about off-site learning, and colleagues had talked about changing relationships, and something that we've set up is a closed Facebook group called Hebden Green Pupils and Families Wellbeing and Support. And that's been probably the best thing that we've done. We've had many thousands of interactions on it this week from over 200 of our school community who are constantly posting clips, pictures, images of work. But we've also had our teachers record model lessons and structures for supporting those children who need it most. So for example, queuing in, queuing out, circle time activities, to support parents not to have to produce anything, but to help them with children listening and attending when they're in their most crisis point. So if anybody would like to pop into that Facebook page to have a look, if you email me, I can approve you through a link so that you can go on and see. But if I come to CPD then, in school, because we've got children aged between 2 to 19 and then learning from A levels right through to P levels, we need to structure really carefully how we support everybody's CPD. So we organise that via Essential CPD, that everybody has to have regardless of the role that they do. So that's your statutory training. Core CPD, allied to the work that you do with the age or ability of the pupil or student. And then elective CPD to support your own career progression. So in those 3 bands of training, we've now built a distance learning offer. So essential, core and elective. And Stacey's mapped that into an overview, and then there's a colleague working with her to check that we have the right email addresses, that people have access to computers or technology should they want to. And within that, it might be also important to note that our leadership team's usual roles have been paused. The 6 of us have all got very clearly defined roles where we've taken complete responsibility. So Stacey, who's our Senko, is instead now running all off-site learning in CPD. Sally, our head of care, has a specific role. Danny has a specific role. And I'm going to pause there.
Thanks, Alison. Great to see you. Right, let's go into the questions, Ray. If you've got any questions, and Alison and Becky and maybe Alison, we could might push them out to you, okay? Because this is about something which we all need to go and share the expertise around. Ray, any specific questions that we need to pick up?
So we actually haven't got any specific questions. What we've got are people comparing or sharing ideas. And again, the same sort of message about which came from Catriona. We have to accept that all our families are different. I agree about families learning together, but at some point we will be back to the old accountabilities. And we just have this real variety of thoughts, and that is because this is so new that there is no coalescence on agreements. And that is as you would expect, because we're only 1 week in. I think that any ways that we can bring ideas together, that's going to be very helpful, because at the moment all of these ideas are floating around and with lots of different viewpoints. So honestly, at this point, we don't have any major questions, but I'm just going to give a shout out to Robin Hood Matt, who, if you go to their website, they've got a really great page on project-based learning. So I would encourage teachers to look into that, because there are lots of examples of project-based learning, so that then the teachers can be using their time to explore longer-term solutions. We will be unfortunately seeing lots of duplication if we're not careful, and I think we need to be signposting where we've got resources that are really working, such as the Troll Hunter, such as great resources for professional development.
Okay, thank you, Ray. That's really helpful. Alan Brown, I just want to bring in the comment you spoke to me about this morning on the telephone. Alan Brown, are you there?
Hi there. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Alan.
Which one did you want to? The one from Schools Week?
No, you made a comment really about the difference between families and the attainment gap between disadvantaged children.
Yeah, we at our school we've got quite a broad sort of church in terms of disadvantaged and what children can access, and some of our families are bigger, and we know that not all of our families have the same access to devices, so we've tried to strip back really on what we're doing and not just rely on online things. We used our front page of the website with the activities that children will do, but we've sort of said to staff really that try and make sure that those activities can be completed by the children with as little input from adults as possible, because this week has been manic for us. You can just imagine what it's been like for our families as well. So yeah, moving forward with that. But it was interesting, Schools Week this morning, they have looked at the difference in availability of online learning, mainly between private and state schools. And obviously private schools have had much more access to it from what they can see. And I don't know if Becky can comment about what the Teacher Tap survey found out yesterday about it, because I think there's a question about that as well.
Yeah, so I mean, that story from Schools Week has come from the Teacher Tap data, where we asked people about availability amongst their pupils of both like suitable devices and internet. And actually, like the social gradient between schools that serve disadvantaged areas and advantaged areas on internet availability isn't quite so stark. So, you know, a lot of the kids, they do have access to the internet regardless of what kind of families they live in. The issue is they don't have suitable devices to do work on, because they're accessing the internet via their mum's phone or whatever. And so it means that, like, in theory, some of the apps they could use, you know, like the hit the button type apps, because they have a device that they can do it on. But there's loads of other things that they can't do because they don't have a computer that they can use. So that's the major issue. The data's reporting. It's not always internet access, it's actually suitable devices.
Thank you, Becky. Okay, so Alison, did you want to say something there? Or...
Just to say, Simon, that we will at the Chartered College be trying to collate as many resources as we possibly can and centralise them, but also we want to collect case studies from schools of how they are embracing this challenge. And even just on this, in this last half an hour, we've heard some really rich examples of that. And we don't want 25,000 schools across the country all making up their own solutions. We're a very pressed workforce, and we need to be doing the most optimal things. So the Chartered College will do the best we can to help with that. And just to say, it's also mentioned in Schools Week today that the Chartered College will be working to connect teachers. So if you want to be part of this, it's the Chartered College Teach Together, and we will be asking teachers to sign up, give their mobile phone numbers, and we will be connecting a whole community across the country as we try and work our way forward, because we need to keep in good heart, don't we? Thank you.
We do. Thank you very much. Yeah, we are social animals, aren't we, as teachers? And opportunities to actually go network professionally on this webinar has been essential for us. So I'm going to wind it up there. A few key learning points. I think Dan's internet's gone, so I'll just summarise. It's not statutory for schools to be providing this. Really important that we don't try and invent school. Really important we don't overpromise as well to our parents and build a model which is unsustainable, because we haven't got to the point yet in our school where people are getting sick. But I heard of a head teacher that sadly died and a second head teacher in the Midlands. So it is starting to affect our communities. So whatever models we build, they've got to be sustainable. We're very much focused in Cheshire West on a 2-week on, 2-week off timetable, because we feel that's got real resilience. Because if you build something which overpromises, it could just fall apart. But we need to be there for our families, for our staff, and for make sure we get through this together. So thank you, everybody. And we always on these webinars for the last few days, we always give Chris Dyson the last word. So we always give Chris the last word, just to give an inspiring rallying call at the end of our webinars. But thanks for joining us, everybody. We're having a break now, but we're back on Monday talking about early years and some of the challenges around some of our private nurseries and voluntary nurseries closing. So we'll see you back at the same time on Monday if you can join us. Chris Dyson, last word.
Thanks, Simon. Just to reiterate, from making sure now that we're on Friday, when it starts to Monday, we keep the schools tight and we keep the schools small as numbers as possible. I was so stupid when I left school last Friday. I don't mind admitting it. I was opening to 140 people, which is ridiculously far too many. Because if I'd have opened up with 140 people, infecting 2.5 people every 5 days, meant that each child would have been infecting 460 children after 30 days. Times that by 140 means that potentially, by me being so daft, 64,400 extra people would have been infected this week. Cutting the numbers down to 12 is vital. This window, as we keep talking about, is getting tighter and tighter, and we can't get us foot off the gas now. We've got to make sure we carry on being strong with these key workers, because it's going to get even bigger with more people wanting to send their children to school. But we've got to keep the lack of children in school to stop the infection by still following all the safeguarding regulations. Do it FaceTime, whichever way. Great lineup today. Really honoured to be part of it.
Thanks, Chris. Bye, everybody. See you Monday.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Dan.
Dan's back.
I have managed to record it.
Okay.
Be a highlight
Thanks,
for you
Dan.
later. Take care, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Thanks, Dan.
Everyone,
Bye-bye now.
bye. Nice one today.
Bye.